The Unwilling Death Caller. This story is true. It happened to my father in the summer of 2007 on the outskirts of Guadalajara, Mexico. My father found a dead body that day. That in itself was not unusual. He had found 7 corpses before that one throughout his lifetime. But this time was different. This time the dead man did not want to be found alone, and when my father opened his eyes and looked into the darkness of that abandoned house, dozens of other eyes opened too, staring back at him. They had been waiting for him for a very long time, and from that night forward they never stopped watching. My name is Catalina Salinas. I am 35 years old now, but the story I am about to tell you happened when I was 18. I am not telling this story because I want fame or money. I am telling it because I need someone to believe me. The psychiatrist says I have post-traumatic stress disorder. My husband thinks I should take medication, but I know what I saw was real. And if you are listening to this story alone at night, perhaps you should turn on the lights, because there are things that do not like the darkness, and there are things that live inside it. My father, Heriberto Salinas, was a pepenador, a garbage picker. In Mexico, pepenadors are not respected by society. We lived on the margins quite literally. Our house sat at the end of a dead-end alley only 2 kilometers from the city landfill. The stench of rotting garbage drifted into our home every afternoon when the wind shifted. The smell clung to our clothes, our hair, our skin. No matter how many times my mother scrubbed the floors with pine-scented cleaner, the odor always found its way back. It was the smell of our lives, of our poverty, of everything we could not escape. But what made my father different was not his occupation. It was what he had carried inside him since the day he was born. My father could hear the dead, not always, only when they wanted to be heard. And when that happened, he had no choice. The calling would follow him like an unending ache, a migraine that pulsed behind his eyes and rattled his bones until he found the source. My grandmother called it El Don Maldito, the cursed gift. My father called it hell. In 2007, my father was 52 years old, 20 years of pedaling his tricycle cart through the streets, bending over trash heaps, had curved his spine and worn down his knees until they clicked like old door hinges every time he climbed the stairs. His eyes had grown dim from dust and harsh sunlight. His hands were calloused and cracked, always bearing fresh cuts from sharp metal edges. But what weakened him fastest was not age. It was the sleepless nights. The voices that came to him in the darkness, begging, pleading, demanding. The dead do not care if you are tired. They do not care if you have a family waiting at home. They only care about being found. No one outside our family believed what my father said. No one except my grandmother, who had passed away 4 years earlier. My mother loved my father deeply, but she always avoided the subject. My older brothers thought he was a little touched in the head, a bit eccentric from working under the sun too long. The neighbors whispered behind his back that old Heriberto had gone soft in the brain. My father knew what they said, and he had learned to keep silent. But silence did not make the voices go away. They simply waited. We lived in a small 1-story house built from unpainted cinder blocks. The corrugated tin roof rusted at the edges, turning hot as an oven in summer and leaking like a sieve during the rainy season. There were 5 of us in the family: my father, my mother, and 3 children. I was the youngest. My 2 older brothers had already moved away for work, leaving just my parents and me in that cramped little house at the end of the alley. That day, August 15th, 2007, was my 18th birthday. My mother had been preparing flan since early morning. The sweet smell of caramelized sugar drifted through our small kitchen, temporarily masking the perpetual dampness that clung to our walls. She had bought candles from the market, real candles, not the cheap ones that melted too fast. She had invited a few neighbors, nothing extravagant, just enough to make me feel special. My father promised he would come home early. He promised he would not miss my celebration. He did not keep that promise. My father left the house while the sky was still dark. That was his normal routine. Wake at 4 in the morning, drink a cup of strong black coffee, then pedal his old tricycle cart out onto the streets before the sun rose. The best garbage pickers were the earliest ones. While the city slept, the trash remained undisturbed and valuable materials still lay waiting to be claimed. By 2 in the afternoon, my father had traveled farther than usual. He had heard about an abandoned construction site on the northern edge of the city, a housing development that had been halted after the economic crisis. Dozens of half-built houses full of discarded materials, copper wiring, metal pipes, aluminum window frames. For men like my father, it was a gold mine, but it was also a place no one wanted to visit, the kind of place where stray dogs went to die, the kind of place where things got lost and never came back. The construction site sat 12 kilometers from downtown at the end of a rutted dirt road where no buses ran. There were no electrical poles, no streetlights, no cell phone signal for at least 5 kilometers in any direction. When my father arrived, he said the air felt different, heavier, thicker, as if something invisible was pressing down from above, making each breath a conscious effort. The sky was cloudless, the August sun blazing, yet he felt a chill crawling up his spine. The smell was different, too. Not the usual garbage smell, not rotting food or burning plastic or wet paper. This was something else. The scent of damp earth, of decaying grass, and something beneath that, something he could not quite name, sweet and acrid at the same time, a smell that made his stomach turn. My father had encountered that smell before. He knew exactly what it meant. It was the smell of a corpse. He stopped his tricycle in front of a half-built house at the far end of the site. The foundation was complete, the walls rising to about half their intended height, but there was no roof. Weeds had grown wild throughout the structure, tall grass reaching up to his waist, surprisingly green against the dry concrete rubble. That was when he heard it. A tapping sound, steady, rhythmic, like someone rapping their knuckles against brick. My father stopped and listened. The sound ceased. Probably just a stray cat, he told himself. Abandoned construction sites always had cats. They came looking for mice for shelter from the rain. He continued walking into the house. The moment he crossed through the doorless entrance, he felt eyes on him. Not the vague sensation of being watched that you sometimes get in lonely places. This was different. He could feel multiple gazes boring into his back, his neck, his skull. Dozens of eyes tracking every step he took. He spun around. Nothing. Only the shadows in the corner of the room, pooling darker than they should have been despite the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window openings. You are getting old, he told himself, tired and imagining things. He walked deeper into the house. The temperature dropped with every step. Outside it was 35 degrees Celsius, the brutal Mexican summer heat that blistered skin and made sweat evaporate before it could cool you down. But inside this house my father could feel his breath turning to mist. He could see the vapor curling from his lips in August. In Mexico must be the shade, he reasoned, the walls blocking the sun, some kind of draft, but there was no draft. The air hung perfectly still, thick and motionless as stagnant water. And then the tapping started again, closer this time. My father's heart began to race. His palms grew slick with sweat despite the cold. He knew he should leave. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to get on his tricycle, to pedal away as fast as his old legs could manage. But then came the voice, a man's voice, deep, hoarse, and filled with a desperation that made my father's chest ache. "Hey, ven, aquí estoy. Hey, come here, I am here." My father froze. He recognized that voice, not the specific speaker, but the quality of it, the hollow resonance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He had heard voices like this too many times in his life to mistake them for anything else. This was the voice of the dead. The headache came first. It struck without warning, like a drill boring through his temples from one side to the other. His vision blurred. For several seconds he was nearly blind, seeing only spots of light dancing in the darkness. Then came the trembling. His hands began to shake uncontrollably, not from cold or fear, but from something deeper, something in his bones, in his marrow, as if his body was trying to escape from itself. His heart pounded erratically, cold sweat erupted across his skin, and the voice continued. Por favor, mi esposa no sabe, ella me espera, please. My wife does not know. She's waiting for me. My father could have walked away. He had done it before. Not every time did he follow the calling. There were occasions when he was too exhausted, too afraid, too weak to face what waited on the other side. But when he ignored the voices, they followed him home. They echoed through his dreams, transformed his sleep into nightmares. They stole his appetite, his ability to work, his ability to live normally. The calling would persist until he returned and found its source. That was the curse. That was the price of his gift. This time, though, there was something else. The man's voice was not alone. Underneath it, woven through it like a thread of ice, my father heard another sound. A child crying. Not the cry of an ordinary child. This was weak, choked, muffled, the sob of a baby who had cried so long they had no strength left. And the most terrifying part was that the sound did not come from outside a body. It came from inside a womb. My father understood then. This man had died while his wife was pregnant, and he could not rest because he was worried about his unborn child. A child who would never know its father's face. A child who would grow up wondering why daddy never came home. Ayúdame. Mi hijo. Él no sabe que existo. Help me. My son. He does not know I exist. My father closed his eyes. The weight of those words pressed against his chest like a stone. He thought of his own children, of me waiting at home with birthday candles, of the promises he had made to my mother, of everything he would lose if he stepped further into the darkness. But some doors once opened cannot be closed. He walked into the shadows, and the shadows answered. As my father crossed through the doorless frame leading deeper into the house, he felt something touch his shoulder. Not the brush of wind, not the tickle of an insect. This was a hand, cold, wet, gripping his flesh with a pressure that spoke of desperation. He whipped around. No one stood behind him. The room was empty except for the weeds growing through the cracked concrete floor and the dust motes floating in the thin beams of light. But on his shoulder there was a stain, a handprint, dark red, blood. My father stared at the mark, fresh, still glistening. The outline of 5 fingers pressed into the fabric of his worn work shirt. He had not touched anything red. He had not injured himself. There was no explanation for how this stain had appeared, unless someone had touched him, someone whose hands were covered in blood, someone he could not see. The voice came again, louder, this time more urgent. No te vayas, estoy aquí, encuéntrame. Do not leave, I am here, find me. My father's grandmother had taught him rules about dealing with the dead. Rules that had been passed down through generations of their family ever since the curse began nearly a century ago. Never look directly into their eyes. Never give them your real name. Never make promises you cannot keep. And above all else, never bring them home. He had already broken the most important rule. He had looked into the darkness, and the darkness had looked back. Now he stood at the threshold of something he could not undo. He could still turn back. He could still run. But then he heard the child crying again, that pitiful sound of an infant who had not yet been born, weeping for a father it would never meet. Some things are more powerful than fear. Some voices cannot be ignored. My father took a deep breath, clutched his small flashlight, and walked deeper into the abandoned house. The shadows swallowed him whole, and somewhere in the darkness behind him he heard something that made his blood freeze. Footsteps, many footsteps, following him. He did not look back. He knew that if he did, he would see them, and once you see them, they never let you go. The deeper he went, the colder the air became. his flashlight beam barely penetrated 3 meters ahead. Beyond that was a wall of darkness so thick it seemed almost solid. The smell of decay grew stronger with every step. His stomach churned, but he forced himself forward. And then, at the far end of a room with no windows and no ceiling, he found what he was looking for. A body. Lying in the tall grass that had grown through the dirt floor, a man in his early 30s wearing jeans and a white button-down shirt stained brown with dried blood. On his chest was a small badge, the logo of a local taxi company. My father had found Fermín Orozco, but finding him was only the beginning, because the moment my father knelt beside the corpse, he realized something that turned his courage to dust. The footsteps behind him had stopped. The silence was absolute, and in that silence he could feel them, standing just beyond the reach of his flashlight, waiting, watching, dozens of them. And when a voice spoke directly into his ear, so close he could feel the cold breath against his skin, my father finally understood the truth of what he had awakened. Gracias por encontrarnos. Ahora podemos ir contigo. Thank you for finding us. Now we can go with you. My father knelt beside the body for what felt like an eternity. The flashlight trembled in his grip, casting nervous shadows across the decomposed face of Fermín Orozco. The taxi driver had been dead for weeks. His skin had turned the color of old bruises, mottled gray and purple stretched tight over the bones beneath. His lips had pulled back from his teeth in a grimace that death had frozen permanently in place. But it was not the decay that made my father's hand shake. It was the expression. Even in death, even after weeks of rotting in this abandoned house, Fermín Orozco's face held an emotion that should have faded with his last breath. His brow was furrowed. His jaw was clenched. The muscles around his eyes, though withered, still contracted in a look of profound anxiety. This was not the peaceful face of someone who had simply stopped living. This was the face of a man who had died while worrying about something more important than his own survival. My father reached for the wallet lying a few meters away in the tall grass. His fingers brushed against the worn leather, and a shock of cold ran up his arm sharp as electricity. He pulled his hand back instinctively, heart-pounding. Then, steeling himself, he picked it up. Inside were a few crumpled peso notes, an identification card, and a photograph. The photograph showed a young woman with dark hair and a radiant smile. Her hands rested on the curve of her pregnant belly. On the back, someone had written in careful script, "Para mi Fermín te esperamos en casa. Tu Lupe y tu bebé. For my Fermín, we are waiting for you at home. Your Lupe and your baby." My father understood then why the dead man could not rest. He stood up slowly, his knees protesting after kneeling on the cold ground. The photograph trembled in his hand. He needed to call the police. He needed to let someone know what he had found. But first, he had to get out of this place. The darkness pressed against him from all sides, thick and hungry. The silence had become oppressive, broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing. He turned toward the doorway and stopped. The shadows had moved. When he had entered this room, the darkness had pooled in the corners, held at bay by the weak afternoon light filtering through gaps in the unfinished walls. Now it had crept forward, filling the space between him and the exit. It was not natural shadow. Natural shadows did not pulse. Natural shadows did not breathe. My father raised his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness for perhaps 2 meters before dying, swallowed by something that ate light the way a drain swallows water. He took a step forward. The shadows retreated exactly 1 step. He stopped. The shadows stopped. They were matching his movements, waiting, watching, playing a game whose rules he did not understand. My father was not a man who scared easily. 50 years of living with the voices of the dead had hardened him to fear in ways that most people could never understand. But standing in that room, facing that unnatural darkness, he felt something he had not experienced since childhood. Pure, primal terror. the kind that bypasses rational thought and speaks directly to the animal brain, screaming one word over and over, "Run." He ran. His feet pounded against the concrete floor, crushing weeds beneath his work boots. He did not look back. He could not look back. Behind him he heard sounds that no empty building should make. Shuffling footsteps, whispered voices, the wet drag of something heavy being pulled across the ground. The noises multiplied, overlapped, grew into a chorus of movement that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He burst out of the house into the late afternoon sunlight. The heat struck him like a physical blow after the unnatural cold inside. He stumbled, caught himself, and kept running until he reached his tricycle. His hands shook so badly it took 3 attempts to grip the handlebars. He pedaled away from that cursed place as fast as his legs could manage, not daring to look behind him, until the abandoned construction site had disappeared beyond a curve in the dirt road. Only then did he stop. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, normal colors, safe colors. My father leaned over the handlebars of his tricycle, gasping for air, trying to convince himself that what had happened in that house was not real, a hallucination brought on by the heat, a trick of exhausted eyes, anything but what he knew in his heart to be true. He had seen them, and they had seen him. My grandmother's voice echoed in his memory words she had spoken to him when he was just a boy learning to live with his curse. When you look into their eyes, you give them permission to look back. And once they see you, truly see you, they will follow you anywhere. They will never let you go. My father had broken the oldest rule. Now he had to live with the consequences. He found a telephone 2 kilometers down the road outside a small grocery store run by an elderly woman with suspicious eyes. She watched him through the window as he fed coins into the machine, her gaze lingering on his pale face and trembling hands. He must have looked like a madman. Perhaps he was becoming one. The phone rang 3 times before someone answered. My father gave the location, described what he had found, provided the name from the identification card. Fermín Orozco. Missing for over 3 weeks. His family had been searching everywhere. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the old receiver. "We will send officers immediately. Please remain at the location to guide them." My father agreed, though every fiber of his being screamed against returning to that place. The ride back to the construction site felt longer than the ride away. Each turn of the pedals brought him closer to the darkness he had fled. Each meter of dusty road was a step deeper into a nightmare he could not wake from. When he arrived, the sun had dropped lower, stretching shadows across the abandoned buildings like grasping fingers. He waited outside, refusing to enter again, pacing back and forth beside his tricycle like a caged animal. 45 minutes passed before the police car appeared. 2 officers emerged. Sergeant Villanueva, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and the weary eyes of someone who had seen too much in his career. And Officer Jimenez, barely out of training, his face tight with nervous anticipation. My father led them to the house. He noticed immediately that something had changed. The oppressive darkness was gone. Afternoon light flooded through the window openings, illuminating every corner of the structure. The unnatural cold had dissipated, replaced by the normal warmth of a summer evening. Even the smell seemed diminished, the stench of decay fading to a faint unpleasantness, rather than the overwhelming reek he had encountered before. Most disturbing of all, the body had moved. When my father had fled, Fermín Orozco had been lying in the center of the room, surrounded by a circle of flattened grass. Now he was back near the wall in what appeared to be the original position where he had fallen. The grass around him stood undisturbed, as if he had never been moved at all. Sergeant Villanueva examined the scene with professional detachment, taking notes, asking questions, photographing the body and its surroundings. Officer Jimenez stayed near the doorway, his face pale, one hand covering his nose and mouth against the smell. "How did you find this place?" the sergeant asked. My father hesitated. "I was looking for scrap materials. I am a pepenador." And you just happened to walk into this specific room in this specific building? I followed something. I heard something. I thought it might be an animal. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. But how could he tell the truth? How could he explain that a dead man's voice had called him here, that he had been guided by something beyond rational explanation? Villanueva studied him for a long moment, eyes narrowed. Then he nodded slowly and returned to his examination. The forensic team arrived an hour later. They worked methodically, collecting evidence, marking positions, preparing to transport the body. My father watched from outside, unable to bring himself to enter the building again. The sun had nearly set by the time they finished their preliminary work. That was when the other car arrived. It was not a police vehicle. An old sedan, dented and dusty from the unpaved roads. The door opened and a young woman stepped out. She was perhaps 28 or 29 years old, with long, dark hair that hung loose around her shoulders. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Her belly swelled beneath a loose dress heavy with child. Guadalupe, Lupe, the woman from the photograph. She'd been contacted by the police, informed that her husband's body had been found. She had insisted on coming immediately. Nothing could have kept her away. Sergeant Villanueva tried to stop her. "Señora, you should not see him like this. He is not how you remember." But Lupe pushed past him with a strength that belied her pregnant frame. Her voice emerged steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "He is my husband. He is the father of my child. I have to say goodbye." My father watched her walk into that building, and something twisted in his chest. He thought of my mother waiting at home with birthday candles. He thought of the fear that must have consumed this woman for 3 weeks, not knowing where her husband was, not knowing if he was alive or dead. He thought of the baby growing inside her, who would never know its father's face. He followed her inside. He did not know why. Perhaps he felt responsible since he was the one who had found Fermín. Perhaps he sensed that something was about to happen, something he needed to witness. Or perhaps it was the voice of the dead man still whispering in the back of his mind, pulling him toward this final moment. Lupe knelt beside her husband's body. The forensic team had covered him with a tarp, but she pulled it back without hesitation. Her hands did not tremble. Her breath did not catch. She looked at the ruined face of the man she loved with an expression of such profound grief that my father had to look away. "Fermín," she whispered, "I looked everywhere for you. I called every hospital in the city. I asked all your friends, your colleagues, everyone who might have seen you. I never stopped searching, not for one single day." Her voice cracked. Tears fell onto the tarp, onto the stained concrete floor. "Our baby will be born in 2 weeks. I wanted to call you every day to tell you how he kicks, how strong he is growing. But you never answered. You never came home." She placed one hand on her belly, the other on her husband's cold cheek. "I will tell our son about you. I will tell him that his father was the best man in the world, that his father loved him even before he was born, that his father—" She could not continue. Sobs overwhelmed her, shaking her entire body. Then she leaned down and pressed her lips to Fermín's forehead. "Rest now, my love. I will be all right. I will raise our son. I will make sure he knows who you were." And that was when my father saw it. The face was changing, not quickly, not dramatically, but unmistakably, undeniably changing. The furrows in Fermín's brow began to smooth. The tension around his eyes relaxed. The corners of his mouth, which had been pulled down in a grimace of worry, slowly lifted. Degree by degree, the expression of anxiety that had been frozen on his face for weeks transformed into something else entirely. Peace, acceptance, almost a smile. My father blinked, certain his eyes were deceiving him. He rubbed them with the back of his hand and looked again. The change continued. Sergeant Villanueva had noticed too. He stepped closer, flashlight beam fixed on the dead man's face. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath. "His face, it is different." Lupe raised her head, confused by the sergeant's words. She looked at her husband. For a moment she said nothing. Then her voice emerged, trembling with something between wonder and fear. "He looks peaceful now. Before, when I first saw him, he looked so worried, so afraid. But now he looks like he is sleeping, like he is finally at rest." She turned to my father, somehow recognizing that he was connected to this inexplicable moment. "You found him," she said. "You brought him back to me." My father could only nod. "Thank you," Lupe whispered. "Thank you for giving him peace." And in my father's mind, Fermín's voice spoke one final time. "Gracias. Ahora puedo irme." "Thank you. Now I can go." Then silence. For the first time since he had entered that abandoned house, my father's head was quiet. The pressure behind his eyes had vanished. The whispers had stopped. Fermín Orozco had found his peace. But the silence did not last. It was nearly 11 at night when my father finally came home. I was sitting on the front steps waiting for him despite my mother's insistence that I go to bed. My birthday celebration had ended hours ago. The flan had grown cold in the kitchen. The candles had melted down to stubs. But I refused to sleep until my father returned. When his tricycle appeared at the end of the alley, relief flooded through me. He was safe. He was home. Everything would be all right. Then I saw his face. He looked like he had aged 10 years in a single day. His skin was gray, his eyes hollow, his movements slow and uncertain as he climbed off the tricycle. He did not smile when he saw me. He did not apologize for missing my birthday. He simply stood there staring at our house as if he had never seen it before. "Papa," I called out, "are you okay? What happened?" He did not answer immediately. His gaze moved past me toward the front door, then to the windows, then to the darkness pooling in the corners of our small yard. He was looking for something, or looking at something that I could not see. Finally he spoke. "Catalina, go inside. Lock your door. Do not open it until morning. No matter what you hear." The words sent ice through my veins. "What do you mean, Papa, you are scaring me?" He grabbed my shoulders, his grip painfully tight. His eyes met mine, and I saw something in them that I had never seen before. Not just fear, terror. The kind of terror that goes beyond rational thought. "They followed me home," he said. "They saw me and they followed me. I tried to lose them on the road, but they are already here. They have been waiting." "Who? Who followed you?" Before he could answer, we both heard it. A sound from inside our house, a door opening, then closing, then opening again. 3 times, slow and deliberate. My mother appeared in the doorway, her face pale in the dim light. "Heriberto, what is happening? The doors keep opening by themselves, and there is mud everywhere. Footprints tracking through the whole house." My father pushed past her, pulling me along with him. We entered the living room. Mud covered the tile floor. Thick, wet mud that smelled of earth and decay. And in the mud were footprints, not one set, not 2. Dozens of footprints, all different sizes, crisscrossing the room in chaotic patterns, as if an entire crowd of people had walked through our house while we were outside. But we'd been sitting right there. We had not seen anyone enter. The footprints led from the front door through the living room down the hallway and stopped at my bedroom door. My door was closed. My father approached it slowly, his hand outstretched. The wood was cold to the touch, far colder than it should have been on a summer night. Frost had formed around the edges of the frame, glittering faintly in the light from the hallway. "Stay behind me," he commanded. He opened the door. My room was dark, the small nightlight in the corner providing barely enough illumination to see. Everything looked normal at first glance. My bed neatly made, my dresser with its small mirror, my window curtains drawn against the night. Then I saw it. On the floor beside my bed, where the mud tracks ended, something lay on the concrete. A photograph. My father picked it up and all the color drained from his face. It was the photograph from Fermín's wallet. The picture of Lupe with her pregnant belly. The same photograph that the police had taken as evidence. The photograph that should have been in a sealed evidence bag at the police station. My father turned it over with trembling hands. 2 lines of text covered the back. The first in neat feminine handwriting, "Para mi Fermín te esperamos en casa, tu Lupe y tu bebé." The second scrawled beneath it in jagged letters that looked like they had been written by someone who had forgotten how to hold a pen. "Gracias por encontrarme. Ahora la niña nos ve también. Thank you for finding me. Now the girl sees us too." My father looked at me. I was still standing in the doorway, frozen, staring at the photograph in his hands. I did not understand what was happening. I did not understand what the words meant, but somewhere deep inside me, in a place I did not know existed, something had begun to stir. A sensation like static electricity building beneath my skin. A pressure behind my eyes that had not been there moments before. And then I heard it. A voice. Not my father's voice. Not my mother's voice. A voice that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. A woman's voice, old and frail and desperate. "Nina, puedes oírme, child? Can you hear me?" I spun around, searching for the source. The hallway behind me was empty. But in the darkness at the far end, where the light from the living room could not reach, I saw a movement, a shape, a figure standing perfectly still, watching me with eyes that reflected no light, because they had no substance to reflect. The voice came again. "Nina, finally someone who can hear." My father grabbed my arm and pulled me back into my room. He slammed the door shut, pressed his back against it as if his body could keep out whatever was on the other side. "They have seen you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Once they see you, they never stop watching. They will call to you now. They will follow you everywhere, and you will hear them. Just like me, just like your grandmother. Just like everyone in our family who came before." I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I wanted to tell him I did not hear anything, did not see anything, did not feel the cold presence pressing against the other side of that door. But I could not lie, because the voices had already started, and they would never stop. Outside my window, in the darkness of our small yard, shapes moved between the shadows, dozens of them, standing silent, watching our house with eyes that held no light, no life, no mercy. They had followed my father home, and now they knew about me. The night stretched into eternity. I sat on the floor of my bedroom with my back pressed against the cold wall, knees drawn up to my chest, eyes fixed on the door that my father had barricaded with my dresser. He sat beside me, his breathing shallow and uneven, one arm wrapped protectively around my shoulders. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. The voices said everything for us. They whispered through the walls like wind through dead leaves. Dozens of voices, hundreds perhaps, layered over each other in a cacophony of need and desperation. Some spoke Spanish. Others spoke languages I did not recognize. Tongues that had died centuries before I was born. They called out names, pleaded for help, wept for children they would never see again. And beneath all of it, threading through the chaos like a dark river, was a single repeated phrase. "Ella nos ve, she sees us." I pressed my hands over my ears, but it made no difference. The voices were not entering through my ears. They were inside my head, planted there like seeds that had finally found fertile soil. My father had carried this burden for 50 years. My grandmother had carried it before him. And now, on the night of my 18th birthday, the inheritance had passed to me. Dawn came slowly, bleeding gray light through the gaps in my curtains. The voices did not stop, but they grew quieter as the sun rose, retreating like shadows before flame. By the time full daylight filled my room, they had faded to a murmur, a constant background hum that I would learn to live with in the months and years ahead. My father finally moved. He stood his joints, cracking his face, haggard and pale. He pushed the dresser away from the door and opened it carefully, peering into the hallway beyond. The mud was still there. The footprints remained, dried now into crusted patterns on the tile floor. But the presence that had filled our house during the night had withdrawn, pulled back by the daylight, or simply waiting for darkness to return. My mother stood in the kitchen, clutching a cup of coffee she had not touched. Her eyes were red from crying. She looked at my father, then at me, and I saw the question in her gaze. the question she was too afraid to ask. "What have you brought into our home?" My father did not answer her. Instead, he sat down at our small kitchen table and began to speak. He told us everything: the abandoned construction site, the body of Fermín Orozco, the darkness that had moved with intelligence, that had followed him, that had recognized something in him and latched onto it like a parasite finding a host. He told us about the rules his grandmother had taught him, about looking into their eyes, about the consequences of being seen. And he told us the history that I had only heard fragments of before. In 1935, my great-great-grandmother was a curandera in a small village in Jalisco, a healer who worked with herbs and prayers and, when necessary, with the spirits of the dead. She was respected in her community, sought out by those who needed to communicate with loved ones who had passed beyond the veil. For years she used her gift to bring comfort to the grieving, to help restless souls find peace, to maintain the delicate balance between the living and the dead. Then came the child, a girl of 7 years, daughter of a wealthy family in the village. She had died under circumstances that the family refused to discuss. They came to my great-great-grandmother in secret late at night, begging her to help the child's spirit move on. They said she was haunting their house, appearing in mirrors, whispering in the darkness, refusing to leave. My great-great-grandmother agreed to help. She performed the ritual she had performed dozens of times before, opening herself to the spirit world, calling out to the dead child, offering guidance toward the light. But when the child's spirit came to her, she realized her mistake. This was not a confused soul seeking peace. This was something else entirely. Something that burned with a rage so pure it had transcended death itself. My great-great-grandmother tried to send it away, tried to close the door she had opened, but before she could, the thing spoke a curse. "Your family will hear us forever. Every generation, one of your blood will carry the voices of the dead. They will never know silence. They will never know peace. And when they die, another will take their place." My great-great-grandmother tried to break the curse. She sought out other curanderas, priests, anyone who might have the power to undo what had been done. Nothing worked. The voices followed her until her dying day. And when she passed, they transferred to her daughter, then to her granddaughter, then to my father, and now to me. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and terror. I tried to return to my normal life, working my part-time job at the grocery store, helping my mother with household chores, pretending that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The voices never stopped completely. During the day, they were quiet enough to ignore a distant murmur like radio static. But as soon as the sun began to set, they grew louder, more insistent, more desperate. And with the voices came the visions. I would be walking down the street and see a figure standing on a corner watching me. I would blink, and it would be gone. I would be washing dishes and glimpse a face in the window reflection, pale and hollow-eyed, staring at me from just over my shoulder. I would turn, and there would be nothing there. They were testing me, I realized. Probing the boundaries of what I could perceive, pushing a little further each time. Something began to change in me during those weeks. At first I tried to hide from the visions, to block out the voices, to pretend I was still the normal girl I had been before my 18th birthday. But slowly, gradually, I realized that hiding was pointless. The dead would find me whether I wanted them to or not. The only choice I had was whether to face them cowering or standing tall. My father grew worse. The voices that had tormented him for decades seemed to have multiplied exponentially since that night. He stopped sleeping entirely. Dark circles formed beneath his eyes, deep as bruises. He lost weight rapidly, his clothes hanging loose on his diminishing frame. But he did not stop working. Every day he went out with his tricycle. Every night he came home with new stories. He had found another body, and another, and another. 3 weeks after the night of my birthday, my father had located 7 more corpses scattered throughout the city and its outskirts. Victims of violence, of neglect, of accidents that had gone unwitnessed. People whose families had given up hope of ever finding them. People whose spirits had been calling out in the darkness, waiting for someone who could hear. The police began to take notice. Sergeant Villanueva contacted my father directly, now asking for his help with missing persons cases that had gone cold. Word spread through the department, then through the city, then beyond. People started calling our house at all hours, begging for my father's assistance in finding their lost loved ones. He never refused. No matter how tired he was, no matter how much the effort cost him, he followed the voices. He found the dead. He brought them home. The neighbors gave him a name, El que saca muertos, the one who pulls out the dead. Some said it with respect, others said it with fear. All of them kept their distance when he passed, as if whatever power he possessed might be contagious. Perhaps it was. 2 months after the night of Fermín Orozco, something happened that would change everything. It began with a sound, not voices this time, something different, something that cut through the constant whisper of the dead like a knife through silk. A child crying. I was in my room trying to study for an exam I would never take when I heard it. High and thin and desperately sad. The cry of a little girl who had lost something precious and did not know how to find it again. I looked up from my books. The sound seemed to come from outside, from the small yard behind our house. I went to the window and pulled back the curtain. The yard was empty. Just the bare earth where my mother had once tried to grow vegetables, the crumbling concrete wall that separated our property from the abandoned lot next door, the skeletal branches of a dead tree that had never been removed. But the crying continued. I pressed my hand against the glass. The window was cold, far colder than it should have been on a warm September evening. Frost began to form around my fingers, spreading outward in delicate crystalline patterns. And then I saw her, a girl standing in the middle of our yard. She wore a dress that had once been white but was now gray with age and stained with something dark. Her hair was matted and wild. Her feet were bare against the hard-packed earth. She was looking directly at my window, directly at me. Her mouth opened and the crying stopped. In its place came words spoken in a voice that carried the weight of decades. Catalina, I have been waiting for you. I stumbled backward, knocking over my chair. My heart hammered against my ribs. The girl in the yard did not move. She simply stood there watching. You can see me, she said. Good. Then you can help me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to wake up from this nightmare that had consumed my life for the past 2 months. Instead, I found myself walking toward the back door. My feet moved without my permission, carrying me through the kitchen past my mother, who called out in confusion through the door and into the yard. The girl waited for me, patient as stone. I stopped 3 meters away from her. Up close, I could see things I had missed from the window. The dress was not just stained. It was covered in dried blood. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. And her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too deep, like holes cut into the fabric of reality. You are the new one, she said. The one who inherited the gift. I felt you awaken. We all did. Who are you? The girl tilted her head. I am the first. The one who started it all. Your great-great-grandmother tried to help me once. She failed, and so I made sure that her family would never stop trying. Understanding crashed over me like a wave of ice water. This was the child from the story, the spirit that had cursed my family nearly 90 years ago, the source of everything that had tormented my father, my grandmother, all of my ancestors who had carried this burden. What do you want from me? The girl's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile on a living face. I want what I have always wanted. I want them to pay for what they did to me. But I have waited a long time, Catalina, a very long time, and I have decided that when there are no more of your bloodline to carry the voices, I will finally have my vengeance. She stepped closer. I wanted to run, but my legs would not obey. Your great-great-grandmother opened a door when she called to me. She thought she could close it again. She was wrong. That door has been open for 90 years, and everything on the other side has been watching your family, waiting for the right moment. Her hand reached out and touched my arm. The cold was indescribable, burning through my skin like fire made of ice. You are that moment, Catalina. You are the end. I wrenched my arm away, stumbling backward. Where she had touched me, a handprint had been seared into my flesh, white against my brown skin. The girl did not pursue me. She simply stood there, that terrible, almost smile still fixed on her face. We will be watching. We are always watching. Then she faded, her form growing transparent, bleeding into the gathering darkness until nothing remained but the cold spot in the air where she had stood. I went back inside on shaking legs. My mother asked what had happened, why I had gone outside, what I had seen. I could not answer her. The words would not come. That night the voices in my head were louder than ever. But among them I began to recognize individual threads, names, locations, stories. The dead were not just screaming into the void anymore. They were speaking directly to me, telling me where they were, begging me to find them. And somewhere in that chorus I heard the voice of the girl in my yard, laughing. My father found me in the yard an hour later, still standing in the same spot, unable to move. He took one look at my face and knew that something had happened. He guided me inside, sat me down at the kitchen table, and waited for me to speak. When I told him about the girl, about what she had said, he did not seem surprised. His expression held only a deep, weary sadness. "I have seen her too," he said, "once when I was young. She told me the same thing." "Is it true?" My father was silent for a long moment. "I do not know, Catalina. I do not know what she really wants or what she really is. I only know that we cannot stop. As long as the voices call, we must answer. As long as there are dead who need to be found, we must find them. It is the only power we have over her." He reached out and took my hand. "You are not alone in this, mija. I will teach you everything I know, and together maybe we can find a way to end it." I looked into my father's eyes and saw the same determination that had kept him going for 50 years. The same stubborn refusal to give up that had made him a legend among the living and the dead alike. And for the first time since the night of my birthday, I felt something other than fear. I felt hope. But hope, I would learn, was a dangerous thing. 3 weeks after my encounter with the girl, the earth in our backyard began to move. It started subtly, small mounds appearing overnight as if something was digging upward from below. My mother blamed moles or rats. My father said nothing, but I saw the way he looked at those mounds, the way his face went pale whenever he passed the window that overlooked the yard. On the 4th night the mounds grew larger. The ground cracked and shifted, and in the morning we found the first bone. It was a femur, human, old and yellowed, but unmistakably human. My father called Sergeant Villanueva. Within hours, our small backyard was filled with police officers and forensic technicians. They dug carefully at first, then with increasing urgency as more bones emerged from the earth. By sunset, they had uncovered not one skeleton, but 7. By the following morning, the count had risen to 12. By the end of the week, they had found 19 complete sets of remains buried beneath the ground where my mother had once tried to grow tomatoes. The investigation revealed a history that no one in our neighborhood had known. Our house, along with several others in the area, had been built on land that once belonged to a large farm. In the 1960s and 1970s, the farm's owner had operated as a coyote, smuggling migrants from the poorer regions of Mexico to the cities where work could be found. Many paid him everything they had for the promise of a new life. Most of them never arrived. The owner, a man named Porfirio Carbajal, had killed them and taken their money, burying the bodies on his property where no one would ever think to look. He had continued this practice for over a decade before dying in prison in 1985 for an unrelated crime. He had never confessed to the murders. He had taken his secret to the grave. Until now, the dead had been waiting beneath our feet for 40 years. Waiting for someone who could hear them, waiting for someone who could bring them into the light. My father had not found them. They had found him. Or rather, they had found me. The voices in my head changed after the bodies were discovered. The desperate pleading faded, replaced by something that sounded almost like gratitude. The 19 migrants who had been murdered and buried in our yard had finally been found. Their remains would be identified. Their families, if any still lived, would be notified. They could finally rest. But for every voice that went silent, 2 more took its place. Word of my father's abilities had spread far beyond Guadalajara. People came from across Mexico, from Guatemala, and El Salvador, from as far away as California and Texas. They came with photographs of missing loved ones, with stories of disappearances that had never been solved, with desperate hope in their eyes. And my father listened to them all. He pushed himself beyond the limits of human endurance, following the voices, finding the dead, bringing closure to families who had given up all hope. He slept only in stolen moments, ate only when my mother forced food into his hands, worked until his body trembled with exhaustion and his mind teetered on the edge of collapse. I began to help him. At first, just driving the car to locations he indicated, waiting while he searched, helping to contact authorities when bodies were found. But gradually I learned to use my own abilities, to distinguish between the voices, to follow them to their sources, to communicate with the dead in ways my father had never taught me, because he had never known they were possible. The work changed me. Each soul I helped find, each family I brought closure to, each spirit I watched finally find peace. Something inside me grew stronger. Not just my abilities, but my resolve. The fear that had dominated me in those first weeks began to fade, replaced by something harder and more enduring. The case that nearly destroyed us came 6 months after the discovery of the mass grave in our yard. Her name was Lucinda Guzman. She was 7 years old when she disappeared in 1978. Her parents told neighbors that she had been sent to live with relatives in the countryside. No one questioned the story. No one looked too closely at the family with the sad eyes in the quiet house. My father heard her voice for the first time on a cold night in November. She came to him differently than the others. Most of the dead called out with desperation. Lucinda's voice was small and resigned. She did not beg for help. She simply asked a question over and over again. "Can you hear me? I have been alone for so long. Can anyone hear me?" My father followed her voice to a neighborhood on the far side of the city. Old houses, most built in the 1960s and 1970s, their facades crumbling with neglect. He walked the streets for hours, listening, trying to pinpoint the source of the child's voice. Finally, he stopped in front of a house at the end of a narrow alley. The voice was coming from inside the walls. "I am here," Lucinda whispered. "Inside the wall. They put me here. I could not get out. I tried and tried, but I could not get out." My father went to Sergeant Villanueva. He told him what he had heard, what he suspected, what he needed. The sergeant found enough evidence to obtain a search warrant. The next morning, police officers arrived at the house. The current owner was a man named Sebastian Guzman, the son of the original owners. He protested violently, threatened to sue, demanded to see lawyers and supervisors. But the warrant was valid and the search proceeded. They found her in the wall of a back bedroom, the skeleton of a child still dressed in the rotted remnants of a flower print dress. She had been sealed inside the wall while still alive. The forensic examination would later determine that she had survived for approximately 3 days after being entombed, scratching at the bricks until her fingers were worn to the bone. Lucinda Guzman had been 7 years old. Her parents had killed her to hide evidence of abuse that had gone on for years. They had buried her inside their own house and continued living there as if nothing had happened. Sebastian, their son, had known the truth since he was 25. His mother had confessed to him in a drunken stupor. He had kept silent for 25 years. The arrest and trial made national news. My father was hailed as a hero. People lined up outside our house begging for his help. My father heard none of it. By the time Lucinda was laid to rest in a proper grave, he had collapsed. I was at his bedside when the doctors told us their diagnosis: complete physical and mental exhaustion, chronic sleep deprivation, severe weight loss, and something else, something they could not explain. Brain activity patterns that resembled no medical condition in their textbooks. He is hearing something one doctor admitted in confusion. His brain is processing auditory input constantly, even though there is nothing for him to hear. I could have explained it to them, but they would not have believed me. My father woke on the second night. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused, drifting around the hospital room before finally settling on my face. He looked older than his 52 years. He looked ancient. "Catalina," he whispered. His voice was barely audible. "I am here, Papa." He reached for my hand, his grip weak as a child's. "Your grandmother came to me last night. She was standing right there by the window." I glanced at the window. Nothing moved in the darkness beyond. "What did she say?" My father's eyes grew wet. "She said, 'I have done enough.' She said the gift was never meant to be carried by one person alone. She said, 'It is time.'" My heart clenched. "Time for what?" My father looked into my eyes. "Time for you to take over. Not because you are the end, Catalina, because you are strong enough to continue, stronger than I ever was, stronger than anyone in our family has ever been." His eyes began to close. "The girl told you that you are the last. She wants you to believe that. She wants you to be afraid. But I have watched you these past months. I have seen how you handle the voices, how you help the dead, how you face your fear every single day. You are not the end of anything, mija. You are the beginning." Before I could respond, the lights in the hospital room flickered, the temperature dropped, and I saw them. They stood in every corner of the room, filling the space between the medical equipment and the sterile walls. Dozens of figures, their forms translucent but unmistakable. Some I recognized from the cases my father and I had worked. Others were strangers' souls who had heard about us and come seeking help. At the front of the crowd stood the girl from my yard, the girl who had cursed my family 90 years ago. She looked at me with those bottomless dark eyes, and I saw something in them that I had not seen before. Uncertainty. "You should be afraid," she said. "You should be cowering. Why are you not afraid?" I stood up from my chair. The fear that had ruled me for months was gone. In its place was something else, something that had been building inside me with every soul I had helped, every family I had brought closure to, every spirit I had watched find peace. "I am not afraid of you," I said. "I am not afraid of any of you. You need us more than we need you. Without someone to find you, to hear you, to bring you peace, you are nothing but whispers in the dark." The girl's expression flickered. "You do not understand what you are dealing with. I understand perfectly. You cursed my family because you were angry, because you were hurt, because you died in pain and wanted others to share it. But 90 years have passed and you are still here, still waiting, still hungry. And I think I know why." I stepped toward her. "You cannot leave. You are as trapped as the souls you torment. You have been feeding on my family's suffering because it is the only thing keeping you tethered to this world, and you are terrified that if we stop being afraid of you, you will fade away into nothing." The girl hissed a sound like ice cracking. "You know nothing. I know that my great-great-grandmother tried to send you away and almost succeeded. I know that you have been weakening ever since. I know that you need me to be afraid, and I'm not going to give you that satisfaction." The other spirits in the room began to stir. Some of them were looking at the girl now, their expressions changing. The fear that had kept them in her thrall was beginning to waver. The girl's form flickered, losing coherence for just a moment. "This is not over," she snarled. "No," I agreed. "It is not. But from now on, the terms are going to be different." She vanished, taking most of the other spirits with her. A few remained, the ones who had been seeking help rather than following her. They looked at me with something like hope. "Thank you," one of them whispered. "We have been so afraid of her. You do not have to be afraid anymore. I will help you find your peace. That is what my family does. One by one they faded away, leaving me alone with my father. He was watching me with tears streaming down his face, but he was smiling. That, he said, is why you are stronger than any of us. He died 2 weeks later peacefully in his sleep. My mother found him in the morning. She said his face was relaxed, all the lines of pain and exhaustion smoothed away. He looked, she said, like he was finally resting. I felt the moment he passed, not as a loss, but as a transfer. The weight of the gift, already partially mine, settled fully onto my shoulders. The voices that had called to him now called to me. But there was something else, too. His voice joining the chorus. Not demanding, not desperate, but calm and clear. I am still here, mija. I will always be here. The funeral was small, a handful of neighbors, a priest, my mother and brothers. They stood at the graveside with expressions of polite grief, mourning a man they had barely understood. I stood apart from them, listening to voices they could not hear. The dead had come to pay their respects. Hundreds of them crowding the cemetery in ranks that stretched beyond the boundaries of my vision. They stood among the headstones and monuments, transparent figures watching the burial of the man who had spent his life finding them. My father stood among them now. He did not speak. He did not need to. Everything he wanted to say was written in his face. I love you. Be strong. Continue what we started. I promised him silently that I would. The years that followed were difficult but not unbearable. I continued my father's work, finding the dead, bringing closure to the living. The voices never stopped, but I learned to manage them, to filter out the noise and focus on the souls who needed help most urgently. I met a man who understood what I was, who believed me when I told him about the curse, about the voices, about everything. He did not run away. He stood beside me and said that he loved me, all of me, including the parts that heard the dead. We married 3 years after my father's death. We bought a small house on the outskirts of Guadalajara, far from the mass grave where I had grown up, and I continued to wait for the girl to return. She did not come for a long time. Years passed without a sign of her. I began to hope that maybe I had been right, that she had faded away, that my defiance had broken whatever power she held over my family. I was wrong. She came to me on the night my daughter was born. I was lying in the hospital bed, exhausted from 12 hours of labor, my newborn daughter sleeping in my arms. My husband had gone to get coffee. The nurses had left to check on other patients. I was alone except for the baby, and then I was not alone. The girl stood at the foot of my bed. She looked exactly as she had 17 years ago, unchanged, unaged, her dark eyes fixed on my daughter with an intensity that made my blood run cold. A new generation, she said, a new link in the chain. I was beginning to think you would never continue the bloodline. I pulled my daughter closer to my chest. Stay away from her. The girl tilted her head. I am not going to hurt her, Catalina. Not yet. I've waited 90 years. I can wait a little longer. She moved closer, and I could not stop her. My body was too weak, too drained from childbirth. But I want you to know something. The curse was never just about making your family suffer. It was about making sure that one day one of you would be strong enough to give me what I really want. What do you want? To be free? To finally leave this world and move on to whatever comes next. Your great-great-grandmother trapped me here when she tried to send me away. She closed the door but left me on the wrong side. I have been stuck ever since, unable to leave, unable to find peace. Then why the curse? Why torment us for 90 years? Because I was angry, because I was hurt, because being trapped here watching the living, unable to touch anything or feel anything or rest, is a kind of torture that you cannot imagine, and I wanted someone else to understand what that felt like. She looked at my daughter again. But I am tired now. Tired of being angry, tired of watching, tired of waiting. I want it to end. Then let me help you. The girl's expression shifted. For just a moment she looked like what she was. A child. A scared, lonely child who had been dead for almost a century. You cannot help me. No one can. The door your great-great-grandmother opened can never be closed from this side. Only someone on your side can do it, and no one in your family has ever been strong enough. Until now. The words came out of my mouth before I realized I was going to say them. But as soon as I spoke them, I knew they were true. I am stronger than any of them were. You said so yourself, and I am not afraid of you anymore. Tell me what I need to do, and I will set you free." The girl stared at me for a long moment. "You would do that after everything I have done to your family." I looked down at my daughter, at her tiny face peaceful in sleep, at the future stretching out before her. I would do anything to make sure my daughter does not have to carry this curse. The girl was silent, then slowly she nodded. "There is a ritual, the same one your great-great-grandmother used to open the door. If you perform it and call my name, truly call it not the name I had when I was alive, but the name I have become, you can send me through, and the door will close behind me." "What is your name?" she told me. "I will not repeat it here. Some names have power, and power should not be shared carelessly. But I wrote it down on a piece of paper that I have kept locked away ever since." The girl faded after that, disappearing into the darkness of the hospital room. I did not perform the ritual that night. I was too weak, too exhausted, too overwhelmed by everything that had happened. But I did perform it 6 months later on the anniversary of my father's death. I went back to the house where I'd grown up, to the yard where the mass grave had been discovered. I stood in the center of that cursed ground, surrounded by the ghosts of my family, by the spirits of the 19 migrants who had died there, by the countless souls I had helped over the years, and I spoke the name. The sky split open. Not literally, but that is what it felt like. A tearing in the fabric of reality, a doorway to somewhere else. I could see through it just for a moment. See the light on the other side. See the peace that waited there. The girl appeared before me. She looked different now, younger, softer. The darkness in her eyes was gone, replaced by something that might have been hope. "You actually did it," she said. "You actually opened the door. Go through," I told her. "Find your peace." She took a step toward the light, then stopped. "Thank you, Catalina. I'm sorry for everything. I hope your daughter never has to know this burden. She will not. The curse dies with you." The girl smiled, a real smile, a child's smile. Then she stepped through the doorway and was gone. The door closed behind her with a sound like a sigh, and suddenly the world was quiet. The voices were gone, not faded or muted or pushed to the background. Gone. For the first time in 17 years, my head was completely silent. I stood there for a long time waiting for them to come back. Waiting for the whispers to start again, for the visions to return, for some sign that the curse was still with me. Nothing came. My husband found me there an hour later, sitting on the ground, weeping. He thought something terrible had happened. It took me a long time to make him understand that I was not crying from grief. I was crying from relief. That was 10 years ago. I am 35 now. My daughter Esperanza is 10 years old. She has her father's eyes and her grandmother's smile. She has never heard a voice that was not there. She has never seen a figure that others could not see. She has never woken in the middle of the night terrified by something she could not explain. The curse is broken. My family is free. Sometimes late at night I think about the girl, about the 90 years she spent trapped between worlds, unable to leave, unable to rest, about the anger that sustained her for so long and the peace she finally found. I think about my father, too, about his lifetime of service to the dead, about the strength he showed every single day, carrying a burden that would have broken most people, about the love he gave me even when he had nothing left to give. The voices are gone, but the lessons remain. I still help people when I can, though now it is through normal means, volunteering at shelters, donating to organizations that search for missing persons, doing what I can to bring peace to the living since the dead no longer need me. My daughter asked me once why I do so much for strangers. I told her it was because I had learned a long time ago that every person matters, that the lost deserve to be found. that the forgotten deserve to be remembered. She did not understand completely. She is only 10. But someday when she is older, I will tell her the whole story. About her grandfather, El que saca muertos. About the curse that plagued our family for 90 years. About the night I faced down a spirit that had tormented generations and set her free. I will tell her that strength is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to keep going despite the fear. It is the choice to help others even when helping them costs you everything. I will tell her that she comes from a long line of people who heard the voices of the dead and chose to answer them. And I will tell her that the greatest gift I can give her is a life without that burden, a life of silence and peace and normalcy. The curse is broken, but the legacy continues, not in voices and visions and terror, in kindness and courage and love. That is what my father taught me. That is what I will teach my daughter. And that is how the story of the Salinas family will be remembered. Not as a tale of horror and suffering, but as a story of strength, of determination, of a family that faced the darkness and refused to be consumed by it. Sleep well tonight. The dead are at peace. And so finally are we?